Welcome back to Chaos Corner. It's your old buddy, the Guardian of Chaos, Big Daddy, and I tell it like it is. I'll say that to say this, coming to you from the executive boardroom here at the Chaos Corner headquarters. It's GOC. We're coming back to review, once again, a complete idiot's guide to the world of pro wrestling. A match made in heaven. Captain Lou Albano and Burt Randolph Sugar, dating back over 2 decades ago in regards to the pro wrestling industry. The business, if you will. The inside, the outside, the slang, the gimmicks, the history, the knowledge that only they could bring you and I could bring you here on Chaos Corner live to tape with my over 50 years as a scout, historian, fan, Mark, that's right, I'll say it, and my over 3 decades as a pro wrestling manager with over 20 WWE Hall of Famers, young lions, heroes, veterans. It doesn't matter because I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is. This is why we're here. We're coming off of an unbelievable 4-part series on Chapter 15. We're here. Listen, it's modern madness. It's wrestling today, dated back to 1999, and it still applies to today's business, just like it did 50 years ago. And I was so excited about this, I wanted to jump right back on Chaos Corner here on the YouTube channel to talk about from Saturday mornings to pay-per-view, wrestling in the media. Follow me on all social media platforms, right here on the mothership, Guardian of Chaos on YouTube. On Twitter, it's at Big Daddy GOC, and the GOC stands for the Guardian of Chaos. On Instagram, it's the Guardian of Chaos. On Facebook, it's Prodigio Fidelis El Guardian and Jay Brony. Of course, on Rumble, Gitter, Gab, Truth Social, I do it all in the IWC, a one-man show. Don't go anywhere. Come on back. We're covering Chapter 15. It's an unbelievable read. Let me lower the distraction. We want no copyrights. We want to have a good time. Kick back, relax. You usually catch me in the morning time, nice and early for a cup of coffee, maybe some breakfast. Well, today you're catching me in the afternoon. Grab some lunch, baby. It's 5 o'clock somewhere, man. So we're kicking back in the, not so much in the lounge, more of the executive boardroom, not down in the bunker. But let's get right into it. I don't know if we're going to do this in segments like we did the last bunch of episodes when we cover this one particular book. I do everything from retro reviews to AEW to the WWE to MLW to Impact to Ring of Honor to New Japan. Does it matter what I cover and what I don't cover? Who did I miss in the big groups? I think I said them all. Impact, right? NWA, MLW, Ring of Honor, New Japan, AAA, CMLL, AEW, WWE, and of course my home at Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling. PAPW fans, you're not going to want to miss it in the Paradise 4. You can check out my work on Fight TV with Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling. Let's get into something I was excited to cover. Hopefully we won't do this in segments, maybe 1 or 2 segments. We'll see how long this takes. And again, we don't want to be distracted from the music in the background because it's non-copyrighted, correct? We don't want to get anything on here we don't want to take from anyone. So we're going to even lower the distraction. Again, I did have coffee. I'm on a getting ready for some wings, baby, here at Chaos Corner. All right, let's get down to business. Content, putting out content for you, the fans, here in 2022. Does the media have any impact on the success of professional wrestling? Absolutely. Just like all the other major sports, wrestling owes its widespread popularity today to the successful use of television coverage of events, especially to Vince McMahon. Let that sink in and what's going on currently. Remember the time frame of when this was written and what just happened with Vince retiring and everything that's going on in the business right now. How apropos. These days, all sports, basketball, baseball, football, you name it, rely on media, coverage far beyond the obvious broadcasting of games or matches, and pro wrestling is no exception. In this chapter, you'll learn all about how modern pro wrestling developed in tandem with the evolution of television, from its early beginnings to the era of cable and pay-per-view. I have the halls in right now, so again, I don't want to have to refer to Bully Ray from Busted Open if I mumble or slip. It is the afternoon. I got to keep the pipes fresh. I got September 25th. Again, we're back at the legendary Cadillac Ranch on Fight TV for Paradise Alley Pro Wrestling and pay-per-view. I got to keep the pipes good, man. So bear with me. This is an exciting section that I've been looking forward to bringing to you, the fans. Before the advent of mass media, old-time promoters and the carnies before them relied on putting up posters, staging gimmicks, and otherwise calling press attention to themselves in order to heat up the local spectators and get them to come to the matches. Show representatives traveled from town to town to drum up business. Today's promoters have the same job to do, but they've got very different ways to do it. And again, remember the time frame here over 2 decades ago. And now, of course, with everything that you have available on social media, it's unbelievable. Can you imagine Vince McMahon Jr. pitching a tent? Yes, I could. On the city halls and staging a confrontation with the police just to get the crowd to come out and see Sting and Hollywood Hogan do battle at Madison Square Garden? I don't know about Sting and Hogan at Madison Square Garden. Where did that come from in this book? You see, I got to correct even Captain Lou and Burt Randolph. God rest their souls. How to do it if he had to? But these days, who has to? Think about that as they're putting this down. Again, I say how it's relatable, and what we do here on Chaos Corner, making this relatable to you, the fans, to consume. Let's go to Bert's Corner. Again, history in the making here. Frank Rich, writing for the New York Times, opined, in the earliest history of the networks, the patently clownish wrestling of Gorgeous George proved a far bigger draw than recitals by singers from the Met. And nothing has changed today if you compare the booming cable audiences for wrestling versus, say, those for the Bravo channel. And again, it's right. And again, when this was written, remember this. 2 decades ago, as I read it to you here word for word and bring you the content, it really is something, how it applies to today. In the end, the promoter's job is to keep the fans interested in flocking to the arena, to hand over their money for tickets. Generating public interest was and still is the name of the game. Television didn't change that game. It just changed the rules of how to play. And Vince McMahon Sr. knew that right from the start when the TV first became a common household appliance, which I believe was invented in the 50s, if I'm not mistaken. Back in television's infancy, the most interesting thing on the newfangled box in the nation's living rooms was the test pattern. My favorite was the one with the Indian's head in the center. What little programming there was consisted of how-to shows and inexpensively produced game shows, usually with children for panelists. And there were afternoon kiddie shows. All in all, comedian Fred Allen got it right when he called the television of the day a device that permits people who haven't had anything to do to watch people who can't do anything. Boy, does that apply even today. Slowly, the powers that be started looking for other programming. Soon, TV sets complete with the optional bubble that magnified the screen were filled with wall-to-wall wrestling shows. In New York, you got wrestling from Sunnyside Garden with Arnold Golden Boy Skolin, Thomas Marin, and Abe Jacobs. From St. Louis, there was wrestling at the Chase. Cincinnati gave us the Crosley Broadcasting System's studio wrestling, and all over the country in cities like Washington, Portland, Pittsburgh, Los Angeles, and all points north, east, south, and west, wrestling shows came beaming our way from arenas, venues, hotels, and studios. Of the top 15 shows on cable TV, 8 of them were wrestling. 6 of those are in the top 10. Every night of the week, you could find wrestling on the tube. There were so many wrestling shows that by the end of 1947, so the tube was invented in the 40s, I believe, TV Guide had even set up a department to complete match results for the growing army of wrestling fans. Let that sink in. The early TV stars, by the end of the 40s, wrestlers like Gorgeous George, Baron Mikel Leone, Johnny Valentine, the Zebra Kid, Ricky Starr, and Antonina Rocca had become household names, all because of their exposure on the tube. So too had the announcers like Dennis James from New York, Ray Morgan from Washington, Dick Lane from Los Angeles, Paul Bosch from Houston, and Slammin' Sammy Manaker from Boston. WWF wrestling telecasts back then, Monday nights, again going back to the late 90s here, so let's not get too crazy on the history of it, jumping around from the 40s and 50s to when this was printed over 2 decades ago until what's available now, almost 6 nights a week. WWF wrestling telecast Monday nights 9 to 10 was Raw is War. 10 to 11 was the War Zone. This is all Eastern Standard Time, PM. Major WWF pay-per-view events. In February was the Royal Rumble. In March was the WrestleMania. In June was King of the Ring. In August was SummerSlam. In November it was the Survivor Series. So that was 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There was originally 4, but that's 5 if you look back from history, fans, that we talk about that you have to know today to relate back to yesterday to see into tomorrow. Does that make sense? I think it does. You see, I'm representing the red and white. I know that you do. And just as wrestlers had developed their shtick for the TV audience, so did the announcers. Dick Lane was famous for his "Whoa, Nelly," a catchphrase later adopted by football announcer Keith Jackson. Dennis James used sound effects to accompany the action, and Guy LeBeau donned an Air Raid Warden helmet when the action heated up. Paul Bosch, noted for his interviewing technique, once conducted an interview with tag team partners Ivan Klamakov and Carol Krauser while wearing a gas mask to ward off the overpowering smell of garlic that they gave off as a result of their latest meal. Let that sink in. It was wonderful. It was wonderful fun in the days of unsophisticated television, and the shows drew in millions of new TV viewers. It helped popularize the new medium so much that Gorgeous George was labeled Mr. Television, in part for his contribution to fueling the sale of sets to new viewers. How about that? But just as suddenly as it appeared, wrestling all but disappeared from the small screen. As television placed its bets on horse operas, think about that, instead of wrestling's soap operas. So Hopalong Cassidy and Roy Rogers replaced Gorgeous George and Antonina Rocca, and wrestling sank slowly into the West, not to rise again for another 3+ decades. Wow. That is true. If you look back at the history, we came back into the 80s and Hogan and Rock and Wrestling. Think about that as I say that. To understand the second coming of wrestling on TV, you must first understand the changes in the television industry over those 3+ decades. We're talking from the 40s and 50s into the 80s. For the resurgence of TV wrestling in the 1980s, bingo, Guardian of Chaos is on it again, was 2 parts telecasting innovation, 1 part human innovator. Wrestling shows today not only promote future arena events, but also promote future episodes of the studio-produced television show as well, such as pay-per-view special events featuring Kane's confrontation with The Undertaker in late October 1998 when this book was written. Viewers will rarely see a wrestling show that is more than 50% actual wrestling. Now it might be 20%. The bulk of the show is dedicated to interviews and vignettes, establishing storylines and generating audience involvement in the great events to come. Now we flash back. In 1948, approximately the same time as wrestling's first golden age on TV, 1948 into 1950, the first golden age on TV, antennas began to be erected on on mountaintops or other high points as to service households, obviously, and geographically remote areas where over-the-air TV signal reception was poor. Homes were wired and connected to these towers with cables, hence the term cable TV. Hello? Though back then it was more frequently referred to as CATV for community antenna television. By 1950, 70 cable systems served the small towns of the nation. By the late 1950s, cable operators began to change the nature of these towers, roles, and transmitting local broadcasting signals. Talk about 5G. They began to provide cable subscribers with new programming. By the 1970s, cable operators had pioneered its satellite communications technology. One of the first services to use the satellite was a local television station in Atlanta, which came to be known as the first superstation, WTBS, the rock on which Turner Broadcasting would be built. How about that for history here at Chaos Corner? Not incidentally, by the mid-1970s, the use of videotape, long a staple in the entertainment portion of TV, began to be used regularly in the world of TV sports because it made tape events look live, a la live to tape. Hello? Chaos Corner was ahead of his time. The old man brand, the over 50 demo god. That's me, the GOC. Put these technological advances together and add one more element, the acquisition of the WWF by Vince McMahon Jr. Again, it all relates back to Vince. And you have the makings of the current wrestling explosion on TV. Remember when this was released? Over 2 decades ago. Using cable television and videotape as his two weapons, Vince Jr. began an all-out assault on the established baronial structure of wrestling promotions, invading other promoters' territories by buying up airtime and running his videotaped live shows. Get it? Videotaped live shows in hundreds of cities simultaneously. This blitzkrieg generated interest in the WWF product and stimulated interest in its touring shows. This brought interested, avid, even advertisers to Vince's shows. The legendary Lou Thesz, this is Captain Lou's corner now, Captain Lou. The legendary Lou Thesz had this to say about TV wrestling phenomenon Hulk Hogan. On marketing, I would give him a 9 or a 10. On wrestling, a 1 or a 0. I had a grandmother who could do a better leg lock. Quote Lou Thesz on Captain's Corner. Again, this brought interested and avid advertisers to Vince's shows. Again, with the tape shows that were like live, and he threw them all over the country in different territories. It really is unbelievable. At that point, I was in my early 20s. The McMahon machine powers onward. Of the most important beachheads McMahon secured in his Scorched Earth campaign to dominate wrestling was the acquisition in July of 1984 of airtime on Superstation WTBS, long a TV stronghold of Jim Crockett's NWA. In the face of thousands of complaints from NWA loyalists, McMahon was quoted in the Atlanta Constitution as saying, "We'll show these complainers the difference between a major league and a minor league production, given time." Over the next 2 years, McMahon made television and wrestling an item. For the first time in 30-plus years, wrestling returned to network TV in 1985. I was 22 at the time. With the WWF's Saturday Night Live's main event in the Saturday Night Live time slot. SNL, think about that for the time, when SNL was SNL. Then it was the beginning of the connection between wrestling and rock and roll, perhaps one of the best times, the second golden era. The WWF telecast a war to settle the score live on MTV, followed by the brawl to settle it all. And finally, the WWF pioneered pay-per-view wrestling with its first card in 1985. Earlier, we went through WWF telecasts for the late 90s and that era, and here we have some from WCW telecasts. Monday nights, 8 to 11, Monday Night Nitro. Tuesday nights, 8 to 11, they had Thunder. Syndicated shows, WCW Worldwide, WCW Saturday Nights. Major WCW pay-per-view events. They had NWA Sold Out, Super Brawl, Slamboree, Great American Bash, Bash at the Beach, Rolled Wild, Clash of the Champions, Halloween Havoc, and Starrcade. Now this is the late 90s. Originally it was Starrcade, Great American Bash, Super Brawl, maybe. Those were the originals for the NWA and into WCW, if you think about it, even back to Halloween Havoc. So we look at the different cards that we compared back to different pay-per-view events for the time when this book was written, where we are now, and as we go back as far as the 1800s into the 1940s and 50s, to the 70s and 80s, here to the late 90s, early 2000s. And it relates to now in 2022, as we're 20 minutes in here on from Saturday morning to pay-per-view wrestling in the media, Modern Madness Wrestling Today. We might make this a whole video. This might end up being like a 40-minute video. Stick with me. We're having a lot of fun here. You have to admit it, man, because I am. Just as McMahon was on the cusp of making the WWF the only show in television town, his overly ambitious plans to monopolize both wrestling and television ran into serious problems. His reach had far exceeded the depths of his pockets. In short, he was short of cash and was forced to sell back his WTBS time slot to Ted Turner for a reported $1 million. Think about when Vince first infiltrated in the 80s, now selling back to Ted Turner in the 90s, and then ultimately buying it in later on in late 90s. So now there were two wrestling superpowers, McMahon's WWF and Turner's WCW. And their head-to-head battles for audience share would fuel the increasing popularity of wrestling as each upped the ante with better product, better production, and better promotion. Monday night, once thought to be exclusive province from Monday Night Football, has now become wrestling's night. The WWF and WCW go all out, telecasting their shows to millions of wrestling fans. Their combined cable ratings now equal 50% of those scored once by Monday Night Football. Think about that as we compare and talk about today's ratings, where AEW is hovering around 1 million on Dynamite and 500,000 on Rampage and 600,000 on NXT and 1.5 million, maybe a little more on Raw, and maybe 2.5 million if they're lucky on SmackDown, when they were drawing 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, 10, unbelievable numbers back then. But the wheel has turned. Unlike the first time around when television used wrestling to provide cheap original programming, today it's wrestling that uses TV, presenting what Hollywood Hogan calls the 3-hour show. With less than 50% of the program devoted to actual wrestling, the rest of the time is dedicated to interviews that establish the storylines for future bouts, infomercials for upcoming events like pay-per-view shows, and promotions of future shows on the cable channel. A lot of technology going into that and a lot of different things thinking about ratings. We go to a WrestleMania segment. Getting Jay Leno involved in a WCW pay-per-view event was an idea that came up after Hollywood Hogan appeared on The Tonight Show. His segment of the show did extremely well in the ratings, so The Tonight Show executives started calling WCW, exploring ways to get Leno in on the wrestling action. WCW promoter Eric Bischoff came up with a storyline that had him and Hogan taking over Leno's set, leading to a score-settling ring challenge. Leno's take on the wrestling scene at that point, because he was there at Road Wild or Hog Wild for WCW, Jay Leno. He actually got in the ring on one of those nights. It's no different from going to Disneyland, he said. Oh, let's not say that too loud, Jay. Monday night's telecasts have not only changed the landscape of wrestling, but wrestling itself. The production values have been upgraded as the shows take advantage of improved technology and special effects. The storylines have been vastly improved over the old-fashioned heels versus faces by accommodating to all sorts of characters and plots. And the overall product is more appealing, especially to kids who appreciate the addition of Star Wars technology and identity with the wrestlers as adult comic book characters. So we're over 23 minutes in on this first segment of From Saturday Morning to Pay-Per-View, wrestling in the media. I'm liking this. I'm having a lot of fun. Let's see if we might put this into how much we have to cover. We're going to put this into a second segment. So fans, thanks for being here on Chaos Corner. You see I'm representing. We're kicked back in the recliner. Yeah, it puts 10 pounds on. It looks like it put 225 on me. I get it. Come on back. We're not going anywhere. We're live to tape Chaos Corner, covering a complete idiot's guide to pro wrestling, stuff that you want to know in regards to media and ratings. Stay here with your buddy, the GOC. I'll say that to say this, because I tell it like it is.